welcome back to my channel. Speaking on a rainy, fresh day. I actually love this weather. I actually love the rain. Earlier on I went out for a walk, just a 30-minute walk, which I do every day in lockdown, just to get out and walk around the local area. And it was nice and quiet, and the rain was coming down, and I got a lovely shower. I do love the rain. I really love the rain. It's my favourite weather. Many people hate the rain, but I absolutely love the rain. I love the fresh, cloudy weather because it's not intense. You haven't got that horrible glare from the sun that I find very tiring and distracting, and everything is a lot quieter and it's just more subdued. And I just love rain. I just love it. So yes, went out and got wet. So in today's video, I want to review this book here called Uncomfortable Labels. My Life as a Gay, Autistic, Trans Woman by Laura Kate Dale. So another autobiography. I've been reading quite a few autobiographies by autistic people lately because I just like reading about different experiences, and it's just very interesting because all autistic people were just so different to one another, and that's something that I find, interesting, kind of baffling at times as well, because I don't know, I guess I like to have things kind of very narrowly defined and in boxes, and the massive diversity of autistic people can sometimes make me a little bit confused, and it's taken me quite a long time to kind of work out that diversity, because when I first got diagnosed, just over 10 years ago now, I had in my head a kind of fixed idea of what autism was, kind of how I was, because I find it quite hard to understand other people's perspectives, and I kind of always think, and I kind of find it hard if someone, I don't know, I just kind of hard. I don't know. I had this kind of fixed idea about what autism was, which is kind of like how I experienced autism and how I thought autism was based upon what I'd heard said about autism, and I guess and I had internalised some stereotypes about autism as well. So reading about all the different types of autism, it's kind of like sometimes a little bit baffling and confusing for me to kind of change the previous way I was thinking about autism, and I still haven't got there yet because I always find it quite hard when particular experiences are so different to my own, and I'm like, do they really have the same condition? But yeah, they do have the same condition, but it's kind of like, it's something that I find quite hard to kind of like process and understand. But let me know what you think about that, about how you relate to like different autistic experiences and how they might clash to your own experience as an autistic person, and how they might resonate, and how you have dealt with your own understandings of autism being challenged through what you've read and other things, because I'd be interested to know. So this is just the latest in a long line of books I'll be reading. My Life as a Gay, Autistic, Trans Woman. I thought this book was interesting because I'm not trans myself, but I am gay. I'm gay. I'm not heterosexual. I fancy women. I've never fancied men. I fancy women, and I have fantasies around women, and naked women, and I just love women. I just love the female body, the physical aspects of the female body, just everything about the female body I like. And I've always just preferred women to men, in all respects. I'm a woman lover. That's all I'll say about that one. So as it says on the back, it says, in this candid, first of its kind memoir, Laura Dale recounts what life is like growing up as a gay trans woman on the autism spectrum. From struggling with sensory processing and learning social cues and feminine presentation, through to coming out as trans during an autistic meltdown, Laura draws on her personal experiences from life prior to transition and diagnosis, through to the years of self-discovery, to give a unique insight into nuances of sexuality, gender and autism, and how they intersect. Charting the ups and downs of being autistic and on the LGBT spectrum with searing honesty and humour, this is an empowering, life-affirming read for anyone who's felt they don't fit in. It says Laura Kate Dale works as a news editor at Kotaku UK and has written articles for Guardian and Vice. She lives in Surrey, UK. And I first heard about this book, by the way, in the communications magazine from the National Autistic Society, because I'm a member of the National Autistic Society, so I get a magazine 4 times a year, and this book was reviewed back. I thought, this looks interesting, so that's why I went and read this book. Okay, so let's get on to the review. So as it says in a blurb, Laura Kate Dale, is a lesbian trans woman. So she was born a boy, but she experienced gender dysphoria, felt like she was in the wrong body. She was diagnosed autistic age 18, so quite late. I was diagnosed when I was 21, so not much younger than when I was diagnosed. And I thought it was quite interesting the way she describes her undersensitivity to non-verbal cues, which is similar to my own experience because I really struggle with non-verbal cues, as indeed do many autistic people. She actually describes non-verbal cues as a type of sensory stimuli, and I thought that was quite an interesting way of explaining it, because usually when I think of sort of sensory stuff, I'm thinking like sight, sound, touch, smell, all of those things. And I didn't really think of non-verbal cues as kind of a sensory stimuli. But when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because after all, non-verbal cues, I don't know, working out, say, what someone's face is saying, and their body language, does rely on sensory processing. So I thought that was quite an interesting way of explaining it. So she describes herself as being undersensitive to non-verbal cues, and I'm the same. I'm undersensitive to visual information in general. I struggle with visual stuff, like visual information. I often struggle to make sense of it and process it, particularly like objects and stuff around me. So yeah, I can relate to that. She says she's hypersensitive to sound, so it sounds like she's got a sort of similar sort of sensory profile to me, because I'm very hypersensitive to sound. So she talks about coming out as transgender on page 17. She talks about how she came out as transgender the same year she was diagnosed as autistic. And then on page 18, she talks about stimming, so self-stimulatory behaviour. Personally, I don't know, I'm not really that keen on the word stimming. I don't know why, but I think I just not that keen on like shorthand terms for things and colloquialisms. I prefer the full words. I don't know, I think it comes under repetitive body movements anyway, and I guess stimming is just an easier way of putting it, and it's quicker, but I just prefer calling it repetitive body movements, but that's what it is, stimming. She talks about, on page 18, being overwhelmed by unpredictable sensory information, and how stimming is a way to introduce and focus on something that is predictable, and you can then focus on the predictable, making it easier to relax, because you then know what sensory input to expect, because like say by like rocking and things like that, it's very predictable, and you're kind of like in control of the sensory input, so you can then kind of like block out for distracting, unpredictable sensory input. And that way of explaining it really made a lot of sense to me, because that's exactly how I experience it. I do often like rock, not all the time, but mainly when like I'm trying to concentrate. So like say sometimes when I'm watching TV, I'll be like that, just like rocking, because it helps me like focus. And I also rock a lot in bed as well. Like when I'm going to sleep, I always like rock up and down, and that again like just helps me. I do it most when I'm just about to go to bed. So like I'm getting ready, I'm getting used to being in bed. I kind of like rock for a while because it helps me adjust to like being in bed. And also, it's interesting that she said that white noise. She likes white noise because it's predictable and it drowns out other sensory information. So white noise, in a sense, has the same function, she says, as self-stimulatory behaviours, because it's like repetitive and it's predictable, and it's just like a constant shh noise. You know, like in actual fact, before we were born, when we were in utero, white noise was the first noise we were exposed to as well in the uterus. You know, like a mother's heartbeat and a whooshing sound being in the womb. So maybe there's something quite primitive about it. And also, of course, we all came out of the ocean originally, didn't we? Well, all living things did. So maybe, again, there's something primitive about that, like there's something in our evolutionary psyche or something, I don't know. But yeah, I love white noise, but as long as I'm in control of it. I don't like white noise that I'm not in control of. That could be quite aversive. It has to be, like, after all, like, the fridge is a form of white noise, and that can sometimes be the fridge humming, and that can sometimes be really distracting. Sometimes I'm fine with it, but other times it can be really distracting. But if it's a noise that I'm in control of, then it's fine, and I have a white noise machine, and that's great for, like, blocking out noise when I need to concentrate and often, like, play white noise through my headphones. Even when it's not noisy, I sometimes, like, even when it's really quiet, I still sometimes need a white noise. So, yeah, I can relate to that. She also talks about, on page 20, what I can really relate to, she talks about her distress at an inability to fix broken objects, which she's had since toddlerhood. She explains the reasons for this is that she feels that now it's incorrect, the object has been broken, it's your responsibility or her responsibility to fix it, even if it's impossible and it messes up the rest of the day and leads to a lot of anxiety. Now, I can really relate to this because I have exactly the same issue, particularly around things like clothes. Like, I get really distracted and anxious if there's a tiny little stain on a garment, or if I feel I might have accidentally tugged a zip too hard and I get really worried that it's broken, particularly new clothes, because I want them to stay exactly perfect like how they were when I bought them. But all objects, it's the same. And I've always had this problem, again, like she said, for a very, very long time. I actually remember it with plasticine, when I got some plasticine. I think it was around sort of like my 8th birthday. I really wanted to play with the plasticine because strips were so perfect, all lined up, and they just looked really beautiful. And I didn't want to take one and play with it. But then obviously, that drive to play with it was stronger than a drive not to. So I got a strip of plasticine and rolled it up, and then I spent the rest of the day on my birthday obsessing silently. I didn't tell anyone, just obsessing, going over and over in my head how it was now messed up and how could I fix it. So I've always had this problem, again, like she said, for a really long time. So I wonder how common this is in autism. It's just so interesting that she's got exactly the same problem as me. So maybe it is quite a common autistic thing. Let me know what you think. And then she talks about how when she was in school, she had multiple school visits from the mental health services, but she remained undiagnosed. That's similar to what happened to me. I wasn't visited by the mental health services, but I did get a visit from the educational psychologist and occupational therapy service because the school were concerned about me. But they didn't pick up the autism. Bearing in mind this was in the 90s, they just identified all the problems I had and said I needed all this support. And they said I had severe problems in various areas, mainly spatial and directions and those sorts of things. But it was like a catalogue of problems, but they didn't diagnose me with anything. It's just a list of problems. So she also had services involved, but no diagnosis until, in her case, 18. She also, like me, has synesthesia, which is interesting, although she has a different type of synesthesia to mine. My type of synesthesia is colour grapheme, so I see days and weeks and months in colour, and also spatially laid out in a very textual way. And I didn't realise it was called synesthesia until I first heard about it during my A-levels. I was like, whoa, that's what I have. But it's just normal for me. In my case, it's a positive thing mainly. She has a different type of synesthesia. In her case, the colour yellow makes her face hot, and she gets a sour taste in her mouth, and makes her feel ill and dizzy. Which she says, so for her, in her case, the synesthesia is quite negative. In my case, it's generally speaking benign, sometimes positive. It can be a bit disconcerting at times and maybe intensifies my fear of change in some ways, but generally speaking for me, my synesthesia is pretty positive. So we differ there a bit. Interestingly, she talks about on page 26 how she did not behave like the stereotype of boys with autism. This was before she transitioned. She grew up as a boy, but she didn't behave like the stereotype of boys with autism, and this worked against her. So she's looking at here for sort of how trans intersects with autism, and how being trans can also mean that someone's less likely to get diagnosed, get a timely diagnosis. Because she, but as a boy at the time, was quiet, reserved and shy and did what was told. And then she goes on to say how trans are another underdiagnosed group, because we often think about girls being underdiagnosed, but also trans, particularly boys who then transition to female later on, are also an underdiagnosed group as well, because they present in a more feminine way often, which I thought was quite interesting. Okay, so I'm going to move on to video number 2 now to carry on this review. So moving on to video number 2 now.